everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my review for The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is the first book in the Wheel of Time series. So a quick summary, we are following three main characters who are all men that live in this kind of small middle of nowhere village and quickly come to realize that they have been targeted by this evil dark one, this kind of ultimate enemy. Think like a Sauron in Lord of the Rings. So these three men have to leave their village in order to make sure to keep everyone safe, and they travel with this kind of band of different kinds of characters, one being a sort of witch kind of character who can protect them, and they are journeying throughout this book to this place that will hopefully give them more answers and also more protection from this dark one that's trying to infiltrate their minds. So that's pretty much all I want to say about the summary of this book. So let's go ahead and get into my thoughts. I was very hesitant to film this review because I know that The Wheel of Time is one of the most beloved epic fantasy series of all time. And it honestly was a 5-star prediction for me that I thought I was going to absolutely adore this book, especially because it's heavily influenced by Lord of the Rings. So me loving Lord of the Rings right now and reading through that series and being so enthralled with it, I thought I would love this as well. And that sadly was not the case. And I took some time to really try to reflect and see why I just could not connect with this book at all. And I think I've kind of come up with 3 different reasons. I think reason 1 is the writing style. And this book and Robert Jordan's writing is very descriptive. So like a lot of other adult epic fantasies, we had pages and pages of descriptions of landscapes, towns, different types of characters, creatures. There's a ton of history of the world throughout this entire book. So a lot of that description kind of lost my attention, and I wasn't appreciating the descriptions being told to me because, and I was trying to think why, right? Because I've read Game of Thrones and loved it, and George R.R. Martin is known for being very description heavy in his writing. I've read Lord of the Rings, which is also not the fastest paced novel and is definitely more description heavy than anything else, and I love Lord of the Rings. So why this particular book did that bother me? And I think it has a lot to do with me personally as a reader. I am not a very visual reader. Some readers have to visualize every character's description. They have to have a physical image in their mind of what that character looks like. They have to read very slowly because they want to have a very clear picture in their mind of what a landscape looks like, or what a town looks like, or a certain creature looks like. And for me, I don't visualize a lot of that stuff in my head. So when I read these really heavy descriptions, I always have a hard time visualizing those things in my head, and therefore I just didn't care. And I think why I was able to love Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones is because I was exposed to those stories via television or movies first. And a lot of that visualization that's required from me, it was already done because I had seen those characters on these adaptations of TV or movie or what have you. So I didn't need to visualize them through the writing. I could just picture them without having to read the text to get a good grip of their character and who they are and what these towns and places look like. And so I think that's probably does contribute to why I enjoyed those series, and I may not have enjoyed this one because I did watch Game of Thrones before reading the series. And even though it was a long time ago, I did watch Lord of the Rings. And so I had an idea of what those worlds look like what those characters look like in my head. And I don't have that with this particular book. And I think that's probably a big contributor to why I could not connect with this world or these characters. So that's very, very personal to me. And that's why I was so hesitant to film this review, because this is so unbelievably subjective. A lot of other readers are going to fall in love with this world and these characters and this writing because they can visualize those things and because they're different types of readers than I am. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, because again, I know that I am missing out. I know that I'm definitely in the minority here, and I'm going to miss out by not continuing on with the series. I am completely aware of that. The problem for me now at this point is I read this entire book and I really, really tried my best to focus while I was reading it on every word, every description, and truly I could not keep my attention focused on this book for even one part of it. Every time I tried to sit down to read this book, my mind wandered to everything else in my life. It wandered to birds chirping outside. It wandered to anything but the story. And I don't think going back to reread it would be any different. So at this point, I've kind of feel like I can't continue on with this series, because even though the ending was the most exciting part of this book and it was more interesting and intriguing than the rest of the book and probably captured my attention the most, I didn't know what was going on for a lot of it because I hadn't really internalized or processed any of the rest of the story leading up to it, because my mind just kept wandering. And every time I picked up this book, it always put me to sleep. And I just truly, I could not connect to the writing style. So I think that's probably the biggest reason I didn't like this book. And that's totally personal preference. That is not something that is going to inhibit everybody else from enjoying this. The second part of this is probably the characters. Lord of the Rings, for me, has some of the best characters I've read in fantasy in a long time, and I think that contributes to why I'm able to appreciate that series so much, even if the writing style isn't my favorite. I love those characters. I love Gandalf. I love Frodo and Sam, and I love all of these characters' relationships with each other. This book, on the other hand, really there wasn't one character that stood out to me as being someone I can get behind and root for. Our main character, Rand, felt so bland to me. He didn't have any sort of personality. He didn't have any sort of quirks about him, and his relationships with other characters throughout this whole book, they weren't fun to read about. They were more of just kind of a downer, because he's mainly involved with Matt throughout this book, the character Matt, and they aren't getting along through the majority of the book. So it wasn't even fun to read about some of the friendships in this book, because it was such a conflict the whole time. So like characters like Rand and Matt, I didn't get behind and I didn't like, because I didn't see them have any sort of personality or friendship with each other. I just couldn't connect to them. I think the character that probably stood out to me the most as being the most likable was Moraine, just because she was the most intriguing of a character. She was very mysterious, and she's almost like a Gandalf, where you don't know the limits of her power, and it's very fun to discover those limits of her power with the characters in this story. So I think she was probably the most interesting character, but we're never in her head in this book, so the rest of the characters for me really, really fell flat. And some of them were flat out unlikable. Like at times, some of them really did things that almost seemed just unnecessarily like angsty. Like, I'm trying to not have any spoilers in here, but there were some characters I truly like did not like. Like, it wasn't even that they just didn't do anything for me. I actively disliked them. So I think without having really interesting, fun characters to follow, this writing style really didn't work for me, even more so. So I think writing style definitely contributed to probably my dislike of this book, but characters didn't help its case whatsoever. And I think that's where this also differentiates for me between this and Lord of the Rings. And I keep comparing it to Lord of the Rings because it's so heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings that it's just the easiest comparison to make. So I'm sorry if you're getting annoyed with me comparing it to that series, but it's just so similar. So that, I think that's the other big differentiator between this book and a lot of the other adult fantasy series that I love. I can get behind characters and really connect to characters in those other books, and I find them more interesting than I found the characters in this. Last thing I think that differentiates me from other readers of adult fantasy is other readers of adult fantasy really appreciate the history of a world and really like the emphasis on building up a world's history within a book. And it's not that I dislike having that as a part of the world building in a book, but I don't appreciate it quite as much as other readers, I don't think. Like, this was so heavy on just kind of telling you and spewing these like stories and history lessons of this world, and it didn't relate it to what was happening in the book at that moment. It was kind of just like, here's some more history, here's some more. And I compare it to how Brandon Sanderson writes his histories in his series like Mistborn and Way of Kings Stormlight Archives. He doesn't place as big of an emphasis on the history of a world unless it relates to that issue that the characters are trying to solve at that time. And I think that's where the difference is for me. I like world building to be very organic in a book, and I like it when it has to do with something that's happening to our characters in that moment. I don't like just world building for the sake of world building. And I think that's where this lost me a lot of the time, was I almost felt like I was reading a history textbook because it wasn't relating anything to the characters, and it wasn't changing anything. It wasn't driving anything forward to learn about these history lessons. And I'm sure that changes in future books where you start to connect those dots and how the history plays into how the story is going to drive forward in the future. But for this particular book, it really didn't relate those things in a way that made them relevant to the plot. So I just was like so bored during those sections of this book. I didn't have fun with this at all. So overall, I am 110% in the minority on this book. I did not like it. I will not be continuing on with this series unless I watch the first season of the show and love it and it makes something click for me. Maybe that's what it takes for me to appreciate everything that's going on in this world, is seeing it visually, because again, I'm not a visual reader. So maybe if I see it on the television and it just like makes it come to life and something clicks for me, then I'll continue on with the series. But as it stands right now, I didn't have fun with this book at all. And I'm really bummed to say it. And I know people are going to be like, well, you're an idiot. And yeah, maybe I am, but this is my honest opinion, and I don't know what else to say. I tried figuring out what went wrong, and I think those are the reasons why this just didn't work for me. But I'm curious to know if anyone feels the same, because I know that I'm missing out. I know I'm gonna get some comments that are definitely telling me like, you're missing out, the rest of the books are so great, it gets better, it gets better. I don't doubt you for 1 second, but ending this book and not knowing really what was going on whatsoever, and not being interested in any of the characters, and just not having fun reading this big old book, it doesn't make me want to go and read another 700, 800 book in this world. I just have no interest in that. So I gave this book, oh my god, the star rating is just not good. I gave this book 2.5 stars. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the writing style. It didn't capture my attention whatsoever. And again, I know I'm probably so off base, but that was my experience. And I can't really comment objectively on the content that I read because my mind was wandering throughout so much of it that I didn't even like retain any of that information. So this is a totally subjective rating. Take that as you will. Yeah, I'm really bummed. I'm really bummed because I was really looking forward to having this epic fantasy series to get through and really like dive into and just love, and sadly it didn't work out. But I have a lot of other adult fantasy series that I'm really excited about. Like I started The Witcher and I love it. I'm gonna start the Lightbringer series soon, which I'm really excited about. I have Red Sister that I'm so excited about. So there's so many other adult fantasy series that I want to get to that I just don't want to end up wasting my time reading more of these books if I'm not going to love them. So that's my review of Eye of the World. I am really scared for the reception of this review. I know that some people are gonna be like, what in the world, Jessie? I know, I'm missing out. I know it. I know I am. So hopefully this helps you decide whether or not this book is gonna be for you, because again, so many people love it and want to just envelop themselves in this world. And I recommend that you give it a try because I know I'm in the minority. So I am going to continue to bring this up on my channel as something to try, at least if you're looking for adult fantasy, because I think I'm the only one out there who doesn't like it. That's what it feels like. So definitely let me know if you agree with me in any way, shape, or form, so I don't feel so bad about myself. But thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And until next time.